Hey, third grade. Hope you guys are doing great today, and I hope you're ready to learn some more history. So, today we're going to read chapter 35, Mexican Independence, The Cry of Dolores. And it's kind of a long read, sort of, so I'm going to go ahead and get started on that. So, if you'd like to follow along in your book, we are on page 329, The Cry of Dolores. Okay, before we get started on the reading, I wanted to show you a map of Central America. So you can see Mexico takes up a big part of Central America here. Right above Central America is North America, and you can kind of see the outline of Texas right next to Mexico. And right below Central America is South America. Okay, so on page 329, let's go ahead and start reading. The Cry of Dolores. Don Miguel sat reading in front of his kitchen fire. His breakfast of bread and coffee stood untouched at his elbow, but occasionally he moved his hand to turn a page, or to scratch absently at the ears of the cat draped across his lap. Finally, he reached the end of the chapter and closed the book. The cat, disturbed, rolled over and batted at the pages. Don Miguel lifted the book out of harm's way. "You and Fray Estrada both," he scolded the cat. "Out to get my book." He stood up, dumping the indignant cat on the floor, and crossed the room to put his book in the pantry, beneath a basket of eggs. Curious eyes might notice that he was reading essays by the French philosopher Voltaire. Voltaire wrote about the equality of all men and their right to rule themselves. Here, in New Spain, the Central American colony ruled by the Spanish, no priest should be seen reading the works of revolutionary Frenchmen. You guys, I want to point out, when it says New Spain, they're talking about what is today Mexico. So back in the 1800s, when all this was going on with Don Miguel, Mexico was not Mexico yet. It was called New Spain. All right, let's keep reading. Don Miguel picked up his cold coffee and drank it, staring out the window. The sun was rising, and the farmyard outside was growing lighter. Soon he would need to go and see that the horses had been fed, the eggs collected, and the cows put out to pasture. Then he would put on his cloak and walk to the church for Mass. Since his friend and fellow priest Jose Janquin had died, Don Miguel was the only priest in the tiny town of Dolores, part of the Spanish colony of New Spain. He missed Jose Janquin, but he was lucky that he could still work as a priest at all. Not too many years ago, a priest named Fray Estrada had complained to the officials of the Roman Catholic Church that Don Miguel was a heretic. Fray Estrada claimed that Don Miguel taught strange, untrue beliefs instead of true Catholic doctrine, and that he spent his days drinking and amusing himself rather than taking care of his church. The officials had asked many questions of all of Don Miguel's friends. Finally, they decided that Fray Estrada was lying. But Don Miguel knew that the officials had written down Don Miguel is innocent of the charges, but he does read forbidden books, especially books in French, and he has dangerous ideas about revolution. Don Miguel had lost his job and had not been given another church to serve until Jose Janquin's death left the Church of Dolores empty. The officials had been right. Don Miguel did read forbidden French books about liberty and equality, but here in New Spain, which lay in Central America between the continents of North and South America, men were not equal. New Spain was still ruled by the Spanish. Peninsulares, born in Spain, held all the power to govern the Creoles, the Indians, and the half-Indian mestizos. Don Miguel had done his best to help the Indians in Dolores. He himself was a Creole who owned 2 farms, so he had used his own land and his own money to teach the Indians skills. He had built a factory where the Indians could make valuable pots and bricks for sale. He had raised mulberry trees on his land, hoping that the Indians could make silk from silkworms. He had taught them to make wine from the vineyard planted outside the farmhouse. Don Miguel loved his vineyard. At the end of the day, he would walk through it, examining each grape for any sign of disease. He even talked to the vineyards. "Grow the best grapes in all of New Spain," he would tell a spindly little plant. "We need you to help us make money, little vine." Don Miguel set his empty cup down and reached for his cloak. As he did, he felt a strange tremor under his feet. Horses were approaching, many horses riding fast. He pulled the door open and ran out onto his doorstep. Spanish soldiers were riding through his vineyard, slashing at the vines with their swords, ripping them down and throwing them onto the ground. Their captain thrust a torch into the thickest tangle of leaves. Smoke began to rise. At the far end, the vines were already blazing. The captain reined his horse around to the house. "These grapes are forbidden by the King of Spain," he shouted. "Only wine made in Spain can be drunk here in the colonies. You cannot make your own wine. You must buy ours. Never forget that you rely on Spain for everything." When the soldiers galloped away, the vines were in ashes. Don Miguel's face was white with anger. For years he had hated the cruelty of the Spanish governors of his home, but the loss of his vines was the last straw. Don Miguel was ready for war. On September 16, 1810, Don Miguel rang the bells of his church for Mass. But after the celebration, he didn't dismiss them as usual. Instead, he said, "Listen to me. Listen to the truth about those who rule you." And then he told them that their lives were hard because Spain refused to let them be free. "Now is the time for action," he shouted. The Indians, the mestizos, shouted back, "Long live independence! Long live our America! Death to bad government!" The rebellion of New Spain had begun. Everyone who had heard the speech called El Grito de Dolores, or the Cry of Dolores, repeated it to others. Unhappy colonists gathered around Don Miguel. They didn't have many guns or swords, but soon 20,000 new Spanish were ready to march behind their new leader. Don Miguel the priest was now known as Captain General Miguel Hidalgo of the New Spain Army. The mob of mestizos and Indians captured the nearest small town and then marched toward the larger city of Guanajuato. Okay, this map shows you where Guanajuato is. That's the first town that they attacked. And then if you'll find where the star is, Mexico City, they're moving towards that direction next. Okay, let's keep reading. The mob of mestizos and Indians captured the nearest small town and then marched toward the larger city of Guanajuato. The Spanish governor there refused to see them or take their rebellion seriously. But the mob overran the royal fort, taking over the city's government. And then, furious and disorganized, they killed everyone inside. Hidalgo was unable to stop them until over 500 men and women were dead. The capture of Guanajuato gave the New Spain rebels courage. They marched on, fighting their way toward Mexico City. More men joined them. Hidalgo's army now had more than 50,000 soldiers. But when they reached the gates of Mexico City, Hidalgo stopped his army. "No," he said, "we will retreat. The soldiers couldn't believe what they were hearing, but Hidalgo and his officers turned the army around and went back. Hidalgo, still a priest beneath his sword and helmet, was afraid that his army would charge through the capital city, burning and killing the innocent, just as they had in Guanajuato. Once Hidalgo had retreated, Spanish soldiers marched out of Mexico City and attacked his army. The rebels fought back, but finally were forced to scatter. Hidalgo tried to escape across the northern desert into the United States, but he was caught and put into prison, along with the officers who had gone with him. The other men were shot for treason at once. Don Miguel Hidalgo was a priest, so the Spanish army couldn't execute him. First, the church would have to give its permission. The Roman Catholic Church agreed to consider the case, but the Spanish governor of New Spain lost patience. "I'm not waiting any longer," he snapped. "Find a bishop who'll unpriest this priest." So its A's found a bishop who agreed to defrock Hidalgo. When a priest is defrocked, a church authority declares that he isn't a priest any longer. Then Hidalgo was taken from his prison cell and beheaded. Miguel Hidalgo hadn't made New Spain free, but he was still remembered today. He is still remembered today in Mexico, the country that was once New Spain. Every September 15th, the President of Mexico rings a bell and then repeats Don Miguel Hidalgo's speech, The Cry of Dolores. And I want you to take a look at this picture real quick. If you see the older looking building, the bell that they ring is actually at the top of the building there. Do you see the red rope coming down from the bell? And then the President of Mexico rings a bell during his, I guess before his speech of the Cry of Dolores. Okay, so going back to the reading. On the next day, September 16th, Mexicans celebrate their independence. Okay, so that was the end of the first section. Let me ask you a couple of questions. Why do you think the Spanish didn't want Don Miguel to read about the French and American revolutions? Okay, so if you said something along the lines as the Spanish didn't want anyone to get any ideas about all men being treated equally and having rights to rule themselves, then you're correct. So the Spanish didn't want people reading about the revolutions because they didn't want anybody to get any ideas from them. So were all men in New Spain, were they treated equally? Remember, New Spain is what is now Mexico. Were they treated equally back in the 1800s? No, they were not. That's right. So the Peninsulares, they had more power than anyone else because they were born in Spain. Not New Spain, but in Spain, over in Europe. New Spain is in South America, right? So the Creoles and the Mestizos, they were considered Spanish, but they were not born in Spain and Europe. They were born in New Spain over in South America. So Creoles and Mestizos they did not have as much power as people born in Spain and Europe, the Peninsulares. What is September 16th for Mexican Americans? Okay, if you said it's Mexico's Independence Day, then you're correct. So September 16th is when Mexico celebrates their independence, just like for the United States. When do we celebrate Independence Day? That's right, July 4th. So September 16th is Mexico's Independence Day. All right, let's move on to the next section, the Republic of Mexico. Chapter 35, the Republic of Mexico. Here we go. Miguel Hidalgo's army had failed, but south of New Spain, the South American colonies had declared independence from Spain. New Spain saw their fight for freedom and rebelled again. The second revolt against Spain was led by another priest, Jose Maria Morales y Pavon. Morales had commanded a group of soldiers in Hidalgo's army. After Hidalgo was executed, Morales and his men formed a junta. A junta is a group of army officers who claim to be the true rulers of New Spain. This junta wrote a constitution for New Spain, which they called simply America. The Constitution said that all men of New Spain, whether Creole, Peninsular, Indian, or Mestizo, would be equal. They would all simply be Americans, with the same rights to vote, own property, and earn money. Morales and his army fought against the Spanish soldiers, just like Hidalgo and his army had done just a few years before. But Morales, too, was captured and put to death. Leading a rebel army was a dangerous business. Hidalgo and Morales had both died fighting for independence, but the third rebel leader, Agustin de Iturbide, would be more successful. Agustin de Iturbide was a Creole born in New Spain, but he had always been loyal to the king. As a matter of fact, during Hidalgo's rebellion, Iturbide had been fighting on the opposite side for Spain. And he had helped the Spanish government chase Morales too. But then Iturbide asked to be awarded a special honor, the Order of San Fernando. This military order was a special medal given to soldiers who had been brave and loyal. Iturbide was certainly loyal, and although he was often accused of being a cruel and greedy man, he was certainly brave. But he was told that he couldn't have the medal. He was a Creole. Only Peninsulares could receive the order. Iturbide was angry and humiliated. He realized that he would never fight his way to a position of power in the army, or be given an important job in the government. Peninsulares would be given these honors instead. So while he went on serving in Spain's army, Iturbide started to write down ideas about how New Spain might become independent. In 1821, he gathered the army officers who served with him together and explained his plan. New Spain should become a new independent kingdom called Mexico, with its own king. All of its people would be equal, no matter where they were born or who they were. And Roman Catholicism would be the official religion of Mexico. These were called the Three Guarantees. The officers liked Iturbide's idea or plan. So did the Mexican revolutionaries. The most powerful rebel leader, Vicente Guerrero, agreed that he and his soldiers would fight for the plan. The combined armies of Iturbide and Guerrero marched to Mexico City and ordered the Spanish governor to step down. The governor agreed. This time, the rebel army was too strong for the Spanish soldiers to defeat. On August 24th, 1821, Spain signed a treaty giving Mexico its independence. The Third Rebellion had succeeded after only 6 months. Now that Mexico was independent, Mexicans called a Congress to write a new constitution. Some Mexicans wanted a republic like the United States. Others wanted a king who would have to obey a constitution like Great Britain. Some of the Mexicans who wanted a king thought that Ferdinand VII should be invited to be the King of Mexico, as long as he moved to Mexico and promised to obey the Constitution. Others wanted Iturbide to be king. Iturbide's supporters won. In 1822, The Creole soldier became Emperor Augustin I of Mexico. But although he was a good soldier, Augustin was a very bad king. He had his sister made a princess and his father made a prince. He set up a lavish household with lots of servants. When the Mexican Congress refused to obey him, the new emperor threw its leaders into jail. The American ambassador who traveled down to Mexico to meet Emperor Augustin I wrote back to President James Monroe, "His exercise of power is arbitrary and tyrannical." After Augustin I had ruled for only 9 months, an army general named Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna led a revolt against him. And here's a picture of Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna. Santa Anna wanted Mexico ruled as a republic with no king at all. After suffering through 9 months of rule by Augustin, the army agreed. Augustin fled to Italy, afraid that he might be killed by angry soldiers. With Augustin out of the way, the Mexican Congress met again and drew up a constitution for the United Mexican States. Mexico would have a president, a Congress, and states just like the United States of America. New Spain was now a republic. Augustin Iturbide never had a chance to live in the Republic of Mexico. His enemies, pretending to be friendly, told him that the new constitution wasn't very popular. "The people are restless and unhappy," they said. "If you return now, you'll be welcomed back and given your throne again." Was this true, you guys? No, this wasn't true. They tricked Augustin Iturbide to come back to Mexico. At those words, Augustin came running from Italy. But when he arrived in Mexico, he was arrested at once and then put to death. Okay, so Augustin Iturbide, he ended up being put to death for being a traitor, basically, because he wanted all the power and he was using the wealth of Mexico for his own good and not for his people. So, but the good news is that Mexico was independent now of Spain. Okay, and I believe that's it, kiddos. We are done. So y'all have a great day, and I'll talk to you soon.